Your friends, your friends. Radio friends again. Radio friends again. We've got a lot to share.
You know, it was so darn good before we were scheduled to start. We decided to start before we were scheduled to start, but that doesn't make any difference to people who are watching this if it's been recorded, because as far as you know, we're starting at the regular time. Anyways, I'm Steve Parker here in Berlin, Connecticut, and I got Chuck Krause over there. I got John Landry over there. Got Pete Salan over there. I got Bob Craig right there. And the reason I stepped in so quickly is because one of the questions we discussed was, pay these days, what the pay was back when, what it is now, and what the feedback is as far as, trying to get a job. We're retired, so what about, can we do our services or what? Bob Craig has been in the world of NPR for so long. So Pete asked him, I'm just giving you a little lead up to this. Pete asked him, how did you get into doing the NPR thing? Is it NPR over there? Am I got it right?
Well, it was until recently. We do have some of the services offered by NPR, but we don't anymore. This is a radio station in Philadelphia, which is jazz and classical, and it's owned by Temple University. It's Temple's radio station. And for years, it was strictly a jazz radio station from the late 1940s. And then the commercial classical music station, WFLN, went away in the late 90s. It was sold and it converted to a rock station. Temple University decided they wanted to create a sound or a format or a service, actually, to the Philadelphia community and to become a jazz and classical station. There was a lot of dissension amongst the jazz people in the community, but it pretty much ironed out. And what WRTI has wound up doing is playing classical music from 6 a.m. until 6 p.m. and jazz from 6 p.m. until 6 a.m. Now, since we have such a wide range of signal, because we have, I think, about 8 translators, which means we also get out to places like Lancaster, Scranton, Atlantic City, Delaware, Jersey. It's worked out really well. So anyhow, kind of an answer to your question, the radio station still functions today as a classical and jazz station. However, now with HD and streaming and downloadable apps, we're able to do what we do 24/7 with half the day on streaming and downloadable, and the other half of the day is the same thing. So if you wanted to hear classical at 8 o'clock at night, you would just simply go to your HD2 or stream it or whatever, and there you have classical whatever you wanted, or conversely, jazz, the same thing. So anyhow, how I wound up there in 2005 was when Greater Media closed up WPEN as an adult standard radio station, where I was with Greater Media for 25 years between MGK and WPEN. They decided they were going to go grease oldies at that point, and the staff that we had at the time was let go. And I, being of retirement age at that point, they gave a nice severance. And I said, well, maybe I'll be retired for a while. So about 6 months into it, I said, I really want to do something. I really want to get back on the air, do something in radio. So fortunately, I knew some people at WRTI doing classical music and jazz. And they said, well, come on over and maybe you can do some fill-in work for us. So I've been doing fill-in work there, which has become a steady gig for 20 years now. And, it's only because I enjoy jazz and I know the music and have grown with the music for many, many years. It was really, I shouldn't say my first love in music, but it's just some music that I followed pretty much my whole life, in addition to pop music. So I had enough to get by on that, and now I have a regular gig there that I do on Sundays between recording, a couple of shows that air Sunday evening, Sunday afternoon, and a live one that I do on Sunday morning.
Bob, do you get
Pete keeps giving you the finger. So I think we better.
I'm
just got a follow-up question.
Raising my hand, Steve. That's all. Being polite. Bob, do you get to pick your own music? Oh, yes. Yeah. And that's kind of like the really reason why I stay is because I'm very, very picayune about that. And they're very generous like that in saying, well, if you know the product and we like what you do, and probably who else are we going to get to do all these shifts on Sunday? It's all Cal Jader all the time. All Cal Jader all the time. This goes out to Radio Joe.
Right. I said, if you do a show, because I've done a few since I've been retired, but I said, if you're not picking that music yourself, who cares? I don't want to do it if I can't pick my own music. I've turned people down when they basically said, no, you got to follow our format. You got to do the whole, I said, no, thanks. I'd rather just do a show where I can pick my own music and make myself happy, because basically the last couple of shows that I did, I just did them for me. I played my music, all the songs, like you, all the songs that I liked. And, and that was it. It had a good response and stuff like that. The unfortunate thing was that it was on the Belmont's radio network, and it was streaming. And the guy who was a part of the Belmonts starting in the 80s, not the original group, but he got cancer, and I came upon him real quick, and no one took the station over, so it just kind of died, But Joe, before that, you I recall you did a baseball show on WAVZ in New Haven. What was that like? Yeah, well, you know what I did? Here's another one. I did one to WFAN. A buddy of mine, Rich Marazzi, who is a rules consultant for, 26 major league teams. He did that show on WWC. He also did it on WICC. And so, he would ask me to come in and fill in or just be a guest or whatever. And so anyway, he said to me, Joe, do you think we could, I think we could do a good show together. Why don't you ask Mark Chernoff? Because I knew Mark, obviously. If we could do a show, a one-night show, whatever it was. It was kind of an audition show type thing, you know what I mean? And I said, okay, Rich, I'll do it for you, because I don't really want to do a show every week and go to, at the time, I think it was, where was it, Queens or something like that? I don't remember where Fran was. It was, yes. And so, so we did this show, this baseball show, and it was fun because, that's my second love, baseball and football outside of music and radio is my second love. So when you're doing a show like that, it's a lot of fun because we're basically talking about the guys we grew up with for most of that show. And then, of course, we talked about the Yankees and the Mets, where they were at the time. I think the show was 2005, 6, something like that. And it was definitely a lot of fun. I mean, and doing the show at WAVZ in New Haven and later ELI, whatever that was, conglomeration. That was kind of fun too, until it just kind of wear itself out. And I finally said, hey, I really don't want to do this anymore. We're working with like 3 guys, and one of the guys I wasn't too crazy about, and so I just basically said to Rich, who's a good friend of mine, I said, I'm out of here, and it's funny because the show ended like that. And because one of the other guys that was doing the show that I did like, he said the same thing. He was leaving. Rich said, you know what? I think it's about time we called it a day. Nice to be able to fire yourself like that with having the freedom let yourself to do that. Go. It's great when you're retired, man. If a buddy of mine said to me, he said, if it ain't fun, don't do it now that you're retired. Yeah. I said, damn right. It's just like, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to work for anybody, where they tell me that, oh, you got to play this, you got to do that. And I said, sorry, sayonara. I'm not doing that. You want me? I'll bring my format. I'll bring my music, and that's it. Reminds me of Joel Dorn, who was a producer at Atlantic for a good number of years. He was from Philly, and also
did jazz in Philly back in the early 60s. But anyhow, Sirius XM wanted him to do a jazz program. And Joel said, yeah, fine, that's great. And they said, well, you're going to have to voice track it. And he says, forget it. He said, I'm not voice tracking at all. People, have a certain amount of stature or whatever and know how they want to work and what they want to do would say, yeah, the hell with it. We're not doing this. I mean, if you're starting out in radio, maybe this is like your second, third job. Yeah, you'll do anything. Remember the early days when you were beginning to do anything? You'd sweep the floors, you would clean the toilets, whatever the hell, it happened to be. Hey, Joe, if I remember correctly, it may be about a year or two ago, I think I saw a video on YouTube. Was it your retirement when you were leaving CBS FM? They did a tribute to you, or was it one of the weekends?
I can't, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff out there that I have no idea what it is or where it came from.
It could have been one of those reunion weekends.
It could have been a reunion weekend. It could have been like Ron Lundy's retirement or Harry Harrison's retirement, because I know they took videos of those. And but it's, I don't even, it's funny because somebody will send me something of the radio station. I was so far away from it when I left, I never listened to it again, basically. And I'd go to YouTube and I'd look at it. I said to myself, damn, we were a good radio station. And, that was kind of fun. It was kind of fun to say we were really that good, and you forget because, it's 20 years. You haven't listened to it every day. And, you can't listen to it every day the way it was anyway. But you forget, and I'm sure you guys do too, when you worked for a radio station or if you managed it or whatever you did. And you said to yourself, I put my heart and soul into this radio station. And you don't realize it so much, even though you get the accolades when you're still working. But, when you listen back to that, what you created, it's amazing sometimes. And, I'm just so happy it was that good. not to be, conceited or anything, but I'm just so happy it was that good.
It's nice to be able to leave a trail like that behind that you can actually be proud of. I mean, and that your peers would agree, gee, that's good radio. And it still would be probably good radio, but at least in terms of the times, the time that you did it, it was outstanding. So you get to pat yourself on the back and it's cool.
Yeah. Well, as Jimmy Jones says, it was a ticka good timing. So,
that's right.
It was a great time. The demographic was there for that music. Of course, there was when they first came on and did oldies, there was a hole because WOR-FM abandoned it pre-64, and so it was. It was the only radio station I really ever wanted to program because it was my music. I grew up with this. I felt it. I went to the rock and roll shows. I don't want to call them concerts because they weren't concerts then. They were rock and roll shows. And and so I just said, told my wife, and I said, this is the radio station I want to program. And because she was a little afraid of me going back to New York because as a jock, you go back and forth and you're at the whim of the program director or the new program director that's coming in, may like you, may not like you. So she said, you want to go through that again? And I said, I have to. It's my music. It's going to be my radio station. And thankfully, I had a woman by the name of Nancy Woodman, who was my general manager. And Nancy didn't know all the ins and outs of programming and stuff like that, which was good for me because I didn't have somebody bothering me every day. Why are we playing that song? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? If she ever said that to me, I said, it's a good song. That's it. We need to. That's it. It's a good song.
Yeah. You can always tell radio schlubs when you wind up quoting, instead of philosophers from the 18th century, rock and roll records like Jimmy Jones.
Yeah, Joe, how long were you at CBS FM before you took yourself off the air on a regular basis?
Well, I had done some weekend work from 75 to 81 while I was programming stations in Connecticut, and then 1 year off because I was at WNBC full time. Um, but when I took over the programming, I said to Nancy, I said, I don't want to be on the air, so I don't want to run a shift and then be the program director at the same time. I said, New York radio station, that's too much. So but I would go on. I would go on, especially when I first started. If someone was sick, I would jump on and I would experiment and do things that I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do on the radio station later on, and it was kind of like a Bill. I got this from Bill Drake, and when I was at ORFM, he was. I thought it was really weird, but he would call, and he'd say, "Joe." She says, I want to try something. I want to do, I want you to do it for me. And he says, let's do something this way this time, and go over. He was trying to doing basically what I was doing. He was just trying to experiment and see how it sounded on the radio before he let everybody else do it, which I think was I mean, I really liked that idea. I thought that was really cool because I liked it more when I became a program director. But I thought it was great because you can experiment and you could say to yourself, it was your idea, but it sucked. So you're not going to do it. It didn't sound right for whatever reason, or maybe you had this in the back of your mind for a long time, and you said, I'm going to try it," and you tried it, and you said, "Hey, okay, tomorrow we're all doing that." So it's kind of experiment. People don't realize that, I guess, unless you're a PD, but the PDs know that because you can do that. Somebody you trust on the air, you could say to them, "Okay, do this for me, and let's see what it sounds like."
Trying to imagine that happening today, where a program director would respond to a general manager when asked if they would also go on the air, and having them try and refuse that. No, I'm not going on the air. You're out of here.
Yeah, right. You're not part of this.
Right.
It's a different time. Radio was. I think we all know that. Radio was a great time and it was a great place, and but you're never going to see that again. I have people that call me up all the time, guys that work for me, and I basically say, they might be a little pissed off at certain things or got fired or whatever. And I said, you know what? Be happy that you were there. Be happy that you were at that radio station. It was a great radio station with great people. It was well respected by our peers and, of course, the audience. And no, there'll never be another one like it. And you just have to be thankful that you were a part of it. That's it. Don't be pissed off at anybody or anything because there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, you really have to enjoy it for what it is. I mean, I'm very lucky that my operations guy who watches over Boston and Hartford for Odyssey. He's local here to Steve Salhaney. There for many, 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 many years. Very rare where someone would go from. We had Jack Mitchell, who was amazing running TIC for years, TIC FM. Then they started doing the Holiday Store and all that, and we
Was that my Jack Mitchell?
Hmm?
Was that my Jack Mitchell?
No,
Mark
no.
Gorlick? Oh no.
No, because he died in 1978 or 9.
But when we lost Jack, Steve Salhaney stepped in and took over as PD, and he was really came directly from promotions, and it was like, huh, what's happening? And now we do, we stay true to the community, but and whenever we can, but they look at the trends of what's happening, and I don't think they went into necessarily years ago, went from being full service into talk, except for the fact, Rush paved the way for so many people and they saw how well he was doing and got on that. But, I always had that, I was a KISS FM, and I mean, it was when they had first changed the format, and I had I was on the dark side, and I was given an account list from the old KISS FM. And one day, Tim Montgomery, thank God for him, he said, "So Steve, how's it going?" I said, "It really sucks." He said, "As a matter of fact," I said, you got a part-time shift overnight that I'd like to do." And he goes, "You want to go on the air?" And I was really wanted to. I was about, I don't know, maybe in my late 30s then. And I really just had said, I never could go on the air in Hartford because I didn't have the pipes, and I wasn't gonna, I wasn't gonna be working with Charlie Parker and my dad, and I certainly wasn't gonna go on the air against him, but he was quote unquote retired because of health reasons. And I said, yeah. So I went overnights, part-time overnights if the janitor wasn't available. And, playing, once an hour, I got to say 95.7 KISS FM in the middle of 60 minutes of nonstop hits all night long. And then eat a lot of chocolate, drink a lot of coffee and Coca-Cola and make it to 6 a.m. But I tell you, my Debbie Gould, who was our sales manager then, went through the roof. And I went, what do you mean? I just want to do this, once or twice a week. I have no problem selling here. I said, but I want to have some fun. Well, you have to decide what you're going to do. I'm going on the air. And I gave up the list, but I was never happier in the business than to just do that. And
Right.
that was really, I always had to do the sales side. So I wanted to stay in Hartford and I wanted to make a living. And I got to voice my own commercials. And that was what turned me on to go to DRC as a rep. I didn't want to sell. I never really gravitated towards money or ratings. But I love to spec sell. I loved ideas. And Dave Overson can tell you, most importantly, I love to record the spots. And once
yeah.
but that was really, really it. And I was just when I quit TIC, I only went to TIC to get a couple of years on the resume after I was out of POP. Never thought they were the king of the hill. I thought DRC was, but it was never about money. And certain reps and a lot of you guys, they're just all about money. But a lot of you guys growing up understood that, I would get into the studio whenever I could. Stu Kaufman was on the air one time. I knocked a needle across the record, but that was my passion. And, to me, it's always been about that. And it was never about the money. And I was very lucky to cut my own deal at POP and go from sales onto the other side because I had enough people in the building that supported that, including Lee and Dave and other people. But, to this day, we'd all do it for free, I think, because
I did it for free. Oh yeah, I can attest to that.
You even negotiated to get for free because firstly, I wanted you to pay me to come on daily.
Hey, I talked to you about MRQ and you didn't want anything to do with that, and they had a heck of a signal. They covered all the shoreline and that, but
no, MRD.
MRD or whatever, yeah.
MRD was MRD LIS, and but it was I said we're not going from Hartford, to Middletown or whatever, and I ended up, being the sole voice of a radio station in a car dealership, But we had fun. That's what it's always been. And we did kick things off a little bit early this morning, but again, as I had said, for people that are watching this recorded, they don't know, but we had some interesting questions coming up. So there's been a lot of people that have joined in on the show, but I'm just going to whip around so we can keep the discussion going. And I just want to, say welcome to everybody. Pete Salance here. John Landry's here. Chuck Krause is here. Bob Craig. Glenn Edwards is with the ELI building behind him. I love that. Dave Overson's here. Ed Bruder is here from OBG.com and all the other archiving stuff. And we got Jim Harrington just jumped on. Jim knows all about doing radio for free. Another guy I brought into the business for free. And Lee Gordon, Bob Marks, and Joe McCoy's here. And Ron Pell just jumped on. And this is the Radio Friends again for the 21st of November. Pat Sheehan, where did Pat go?
I just had a question for Pat, and I noticed he had split. So
I know.
He had a couple of guests in the background, if you noticed his photo.
Yeah.
He'll log back in again.
Oh, hopefully Pat comes back. Yeah, we were just, we were talking about, the free thing. And Jim, when you and I always would catch up on the phone for at least a couple of hours, a little bit longer than we do here. Mm-hmm. But then you had told me about this new, I guess, like in-car, satellite type of thing, an alternative to Sirius and XM and everything. And you were one of the first to get on board with that, right?
Who, me?
Yeah.
I don't remember that.
Oh, me?
Yeah, let me go back to sleep.
Hey, Jim, what are you doing? The shadow in there? It's all that, that.
I like to do a very
it's so dark.
Yeah, who knows?
Right.
I know nothing about lighting.
Between the
Yes,
lighting
I can tell
dim,
you about that. That's for
yeah,
sure.
between the black background and the black shirt, all we can see is your face.
It makes me look thinner.
What was his name? The Shadow, not Lamar Cranston.
Lamont Cranston.
Yeah,
Lamont
Cranston.
Cranston.
The
The
Shadow.
Shadow knows.
Yeah.
Who knows what evil lurks in the
lurks.
hearts
The
of
shadow.
men?
Yes.
The shadow.
Who knows who was the first Superman? Who was Superman on the radio?
Bud Collier.
Collier.
Bud Collier.
yeah.
That's right. Right.
And they went to
Can't
beat
fool
the
your
clock.
radio guys.
We
Who was-
could win any of those contests, right?
Who was the Lone Ranger on the radio?
Who was who?
Brace
Well,
Beamer.
Lone Ranger.
Oh my
Conrad.
God.
Was it William Conrad?
William Conrad.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
No, but
No,
the
no.
one I listened to in the 40s that was there a long time was Brace Beamer.
Yes.
Right.
Oh.
Right. Yeah.
Brace Beamer. As a matter of fact, I think he might have been the first Lone Ranger, I'm not sure, to actually get dressed up and go out.
And who was his announcer? Do you remember that? He had New England.
Fred
Foy,
Foy.
was it?
Fred
Foy.
Fred Foy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The fiery
God,
horse,
we're old.
speed of light, cloud of dust.
And a hearty hi-ho silver.
And remember who was the who was Lone Ranger on TV? Remember his name?
Clayton Moore.
Clayton Moore.
Do you know who the other one
I own
was?
silver.
You know who the second Lone Ranger was? Because the guy who did it for like about a year and a half was because Clayton Moore was having a salary disputes with ABC. John Hart. His name was John Hart.
Wow.
And so if you see some of those things that doesn't sound like the Lone Ranger, or doesn't look like the Lone Ranger, Clayton Moore. And I love the Lone Ranger. He was my favorite. And when they took away the mask, when they made that second Lone Ranger film or whatever.
Sunglasses.
Yeah, they had the sunglasses on. And I just felt so bad for the guy. I said, he's a Lone Ranger. You could put 1,000 people, but that's the Lone Ranger.
They should have just said, leave him alone.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Leave him alone.
Alone.
Yeah, leave him alone.
Did anybody ever hear Jay Thomas's story about the Lone Ranger?
Oh yeah.
Used to appear every Christmas on the just before Christmas with David Letterman and recount the story of when they brought Clayton Moore into Charlotte when Jay was at WAYS. And I'm not going to try to tell the story, but it's a very funny bit. It's probably on YouTube.
Yeah, it's great. They usually play it around Christmas time a lot. Somewhere you'll find it on YouTube. Yeah.
What happened? I never heard this story.
Basically, they brought Clayton Moore into town to do an appearance for some station function. And on the way to the airport, either coming or going from the event, Jay is driving him in his Chevelle or some old car, and they witnessed something in traffic, and they had to stop. And Clayton Moore is in his full Lone Ranger regalia. And he goes up to this, citizen, may I be of some assistance? It's just very funny the way Jay Thomas tells him it.
Wow.
I got to see the Lone. My dad used to take me to rodeos. Anybody go to rodeos? I don't know if anybody was from New York or close. He used to take me to rodeos at the old Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
And he knew I was a Lone Ranger fan. Forget about it. We're going to see the Lone Ranger at Madison Square Garden. And he waited. We were supposed to go to a morning show. He says, but there's no good tickets left. We're going to wait for the afternoon show. And he got me and him seats right. I don't know if you've been to rodeos or not, but it's like right on the kind of like fence, you want to call it. And so the PA announcer says, okay, he says, all the kids nearest the fence can lean over and shake hands with Lone Ranger. Now, my dad was like beside himself. He was like, oh my God, as your kid. I mean, I was 6 maybe. And he says, oh, this is so great. This is, And when the Lone Ranger came by, I froze. I didn't get out of my seat. And you know why? Because it's like, for those of us who grew up with black and white TV, like when you went to your first ball game and you walk through the entrance there, and all of a sudden you saw the field, and it was that
Green.
bright green, and the seats, and it was like that old Wizard of Oz effect, from black and white to color. And it was the same thing when the Lone Ranger came by. My father's yelling at me. So I got you in the front row seat. You can't go. But years later, I equated this to taking my daughter to see the Osmonds. So we at the station I was working with in Connecticut, we were just doing a promotion with them. So I figured, my daughter just loved watching the Osmonds on TV. So I said, come on, we're going to go see a concert at Oakdale. And you can meet the Osmonds. And so she was kind of like apprehensive. And she was 6, like I was. And she said, Dad, I don't think I want to go back to meet them. And I said, okay, but Dad has to go in to do some work. You could just stand right by me. You don't have to meet them. So we go backstage. And it just hit me there that she was what I was watching the Lone Ranger. You're so scared because this thing you saw on TV has all of a sudden come to life.
In color.
And it's right next to you. So she was with me. I'm interviewing the Osmonds, and Wayne Osmond comes over and he says, who's this pretty little girl? And I said, and then she said, he said, what's your name? He says, Nicole. And so he started talking to her, and made her so at ease. It was like wonderful. And then,
Nice.
Marie came over and Donnie and all that other crap. But, what was that?
Well, you said all that other crap.
It's like the Jackson 5, all that Michael and all that other crap.
All those other guys.
But it was that deja vu moment for me, being 6 years old and my daughter being 6 years old, same thing, and I just said to myself, wow, this is the Lone Ranger all over again.
Except no horses.
That's true. You don't have to.
And no Tonto either.
You don't have to sweep the.
But you get a lot of joy out of taking. We're all. I think most of us are parents, and I remember I took my daughter. This is in 1989. I was at TICFM, and I got tickets to see, because we were doing a promotion. I got tickets to see New Kids on the Block at the New Haven Coliseum, the long dead, gone New Haven Coliseum. And I just remember, and I said, oh my God, I had to drive. Long story. It was a lot of driving that day, but I got my daughter to that. She was about 8 or 9 at the time. And I got to tell you, just watching the joy on her face, watching them on stage, it just made everything great,
Yeah, that's what it's all about. It really is. It's you just want to see your kids enjoy stuff like that.
Right. My dad loved to take us. I mean, it was great. People say, did you have backstage passes? And I'd say, nope, we had Charlie's Kids. And I stood behind Roy Orbison when Pretty Woman was a hit song. And by myself. I was just back there watching them with the glasses and the dark suit and, being backstage. And I got to admit, everybody that we met in the green room and, having dinner with my sister and I when it was Sonny and Cher, and so many great memories. Of course, Frankie and the Four Seasons, always so wonderful. And, I remember my dad with Bobby Rydell, and I saw the whole audience seemingly charged the stage, and women were really ripping Bobby Rydell's clothing off of him. And really? my dad is dragging him out of the building, and he threw him into the limo, and he jumps up on the trunk. Here's my dad on the trunk telling everybody, get back. And the limo's going down to the Hilton in Hartford, straight down. And as we pull away, mind you, it was Bobby Rydell. So I'm maybe 8, 9, 10 years old. And as pulling away, my sister, who was probably 11 or so, standing there, and my dad in the middle of the crowd yells, watch your brother. But there was only one guy, and karma's a bitch, but I'll tell you, there was only one guy that I'll always remember that I idolized and snubbed me off, and that was Bill Cosby. Meeting, Fat Albert, meeting the guy that I loved all that things, and I said hi, and he just was just nasty.
Your expectations were just blown all to hell.
Yeah,
huh?
But I'd say that most of the people, were wonderful, because they say, be careful, when you meet those.
Working in radio, we were blessed because we had those kind of perks. I mean, you got tickets to great concerts. You got to meet people like that. I remember standing in the hallway at DRC, and Willie Mays walked in, and he was doing commercials for what's his name, Harvey Littman,
Oh no, Reggie Jackson.
car dealer, and well, Reggie Jackson too. But he had Willie Mays. He had all these guys. Then he went bankrupt because he spent all his money paying these athletes. But I'm walking down the hall, and I grew up in New York City, you know, as Joe knows, and I walk down the hall, and there's Willie Mays. Now, in the 1950s in New York City, the three best center fielders in baseball all played in the same city. Willie Mays, Mickey Mantle, and Duke Snider, all in the Hall of Fame. And I'm walking down the hall, and I'm saying, that looks a lot like Willie Mays. And I'm keep walking. I said, holy shit, that's Willie Mays. I says, you're Willie Mays. And he looks at me and said, yeah, I am Willie Mays. Brad Davis here? I said, yeah, I'll get Brad for you.
You know, Ron, when Willie was at the radio station, I was sports director. And
you were there, right? Yeah, remember that?
He sat down with me in the production studio for an interview, and I couldn't believe that I had the good fortune of sitting there having a one-to-one, interview with the one and only Willie Mays.
Yeah.
And I had my a picture of him, and he autographed it to me. And I gave it to my grandson who lives up in Chicago, and he has it on his desk in his bedroom. And I thought that was really cool. I had it for so many years, and I said, you know what? My grandson is a huge baseball fan, and he would really appreciate this. But Willie
was such a nice man. I mean,
he was not a disappointment at all. He was just such a cool, calm, and collected guy.
Yep.
But in my lifetime, I've had the opportunity to meet all three of those outfielders, center fielders.
Oh, really?
I met Mickey a couple of times actually, and the first time I met him was a huge disappointment because when he was signing an autograph for me, I said, Mickey, since I was a little boy, I was one of your biggest fans. You know, to me, you're the greatest. And he never even looked up, handed me back the autograph, and never looked up, never responded. I was so disappointed. And then here in Vero Beach, you know, the home of Dodger Town, where the Dodgers had their spring training for 60 years, Duke Snider came to town, and he opened up a restaurant over on the beach side. It was Duke Snider's place. It was in a hotel. And so they had the grand opening, and I was over there to cover it. And I met him, and he autographed a baseball for me. And so I said, I got the trio. I got all three of them. Triple crown.
Well, yeah.
Getting back to the Osmonds, Joe, I wish I had known you back in the early 70s so you could have taken me to an Osmond concert, because I could hardly wait to play one bad apple every hour and a half.
Weaving yourself in and out of that intro, then, right? Which is, of course, really bad. Hey, I got a question for Pat Sheehan. And
is he here?
Yeah, he's right here.
He's here. Pat, what made you change or switch from radio to TV? How did that happen?
Oh, wow.
He's so handsome.
No. And I certainly don't have the usual look for the TV anchor man. I think
Pat. Oh, yes, you did.
You did, Pat.
Well, you did, Pat. You did. We used to watch you all the time.
I was different looking, which actually became part of the story of how I got selected to anchor, because the general manager's wife recognized me among a bunch of people who sort of looked alike. Anyway, to Pete's question, I think it was really access, being able to tell a story visually as well as by words and sounds over radio. Also being able to, supposedly at the time, maybe being a little bit more thoughtful in terms of reporting, allowing to be covering one story in more depth and being able to put some context around it. There is something about doing every story in 25 seconds or 15 seconds or, a minute and a quarter or something. And then you're really pressing it when it comes to radio. So that's probably as much as it was. But again, I was drawn into it because of the Kennedy assassination. Quite honestly, I had been a student journalist and done all the things that you do in high school and in college. But it was really while I was in college when Kennedy was assassinated and watching the coverage that drew me into wanting to be the guy who was able to go behind the police lines and find out what was going on and tell a story.
You made Jack Ruby?
Well, no, I was talking about someone with a press pass. But I think that's the answer, Pete. It was really more to be a little more in depth and maybe to bring in visual in storytelling. I loved I loved the immediacy of radio. I loved the personal touch that you had with an audience where you really knew you were talking to each person out there, not just the thousands of people. You were able to tell a story to somebody. But obviously, television gave me a better platform in terms of being able to build some context around stories.
That's a great answer.
While you're on that on-camera thing, I know Toby Moffett did some stuff as what was he on Channel 30 for a while?
Oh, he was the anchor on Channel 30, yeah.
And how did he do from a newsman standpoint? I was just looking this morning at some of the Kennedy things, and I know the Kennedy assassination really motivated Toby to get involved with politics and then into television. A little bit that I remember. What was he like as an anchor?
I really had very little contact with him as an anchor because we were head to head.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't really watch the show that much, to tell you the truth. I always had an aversion to folks who were going back and forth between politics and the newsrooms. Still do. I still have the same problem with people coming in who have a political point of view. Just wasn't the way I was raised.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was interesting because so many people. We talked about this before, but I think it's so timely to bring it up because 62 years ago that we lost JFK tomorrow, and how many people, especially political people, from what I understand, the young people, got involved with politics back then because they really did think that because of JFK that you could make a difference. And that was all before, people just wanted to spin their wheels about, what his personal life was like and all that other crap. But I think he really made such a difference. And when you
Well, we're at the same kind of a moment now, Steve. We're generationally stuck in with older people. I hate to look around this room here, but folks our age running the government and being, the leaders out there. And you do have, I don't want to get into Mom Danny there, but there is a thing where there's a generational change that has become very powerful right now, and it's interesting to see what kind of transition we're facing.
Yeah, it was interesting. Yes, I do from time to time watch late night. It's usually because I wake up after I fall asleep at 8. But I did see something on Facebook, and Colbert, who actually has rattled the cage, and we saw what happened with that. But he did have a guy last night, and I made note of it. And a young guy, the hair sounded a lot like Bob Dylan, looked like he could have been 20s or 30s. And his name was Jesse Wells. Now, Jesse he did 4 albums this year, and he's nominated for 4 Grammys. And when he came out, he sang a song called Join ICE. And it was really pretty much about his point of view about what ICE is all about. And some of the lines in there talking about, you flunked out of police academy, you didn't have the opportunity, the girls never said hi to you, you were picked on, in school, and now you can join ICE and a $50,000 signing bonus and all this stuff. But the refreshing thing about it was this guy, he had the look, the chicks are going to love him. He was so great looking, the long hair, the whole thing, but a real sound of that youthful, the Crosby, Stills and Nash, the Jackson Browns, Bob Dylan. And it was so refreshing. He came out, and if you see it on YouTube, it's amazing. The whole backdrop was the American flag, and he was surrounded by American flags. And he had a sleeveless, almost like a khaki green shirt. He had an eagle on his, just one eagle up on his shoulder. And I thought, wow. When we haven't heard anybody from that generation or whatever really rattling that cage. And and I went and looked at some of his other stuff. He's got the freedom, and hopefully he'll stay with that. But it was just so great to hear somebody all those years younger than us get up there and not be afraid of it. And of course, Colbert knows these are his final days, so he's making pretty much some noise. But
well, not to get into the politics of it all, but Colbert has been canceled as much for finances as it has been for politics. I mean, we know that the late night it just hasn't been the cash cow it used to be. We all have watched the demise of what's happened to the radio stations we all worked for and TV stations that we worked for and we loved very much. They're not what they were in terms of financial engines the way that they are. Things have changed. Back to the question of generational change, JFK was seen as being the young guy who came along, and all of a sudden it was a voice of a different generation, and the passing of the torch and all of that. And I just wonder if we're at a time now where you are starting to see some of the younger talent emerging, but really it's been boxed out by folks of our generation for a very long time. I mean, in many of the bands that we all grew up with and loved are still out there performing and drawing huge crowds. So you reach those inflection times where somehow a torch is passed. And so to your point, Steve, yes, here's a younger voice that comes along. But when you mention things like Dylan and Crosby, Stills and Nash, what are you picturing? You picturing them now or then?
No, I picture like when Kent State happened.
It's then,
like that.
Yeah. And these were the young people that it was Judy Collins. I mean, you don't picture people being 60 years old or 70 years old and still out performing. And yet our political leadership now has become so gentrified. I mean, we have people in their 80s who are running our country. It does lead us to a big question about which direction we go from here.
I think I have mentioned before to you that, thankfully, I'm still really involved in the business of radio as it is today, and I'm surrounded by a lot of people at the radio station who are a lot younger than I am, who are people in their 30s, 40s maybe. There's pretty much, but it's so interesting and refreshing to be in that environment as opposed to a bunch of old guys, who you run in thinking the same. You want to have the input of people with new ideas. I mean, throw them against the wall, if you will. You got to try new things, regardless of what it is, and it's very invigorating to be in that environment. Albeit it's rather limited. I'm not there every day, but to be surrounded by people who technically are more proficient than you are, that in terms of the business of radio, if you will, have ideas, and it's just a good environment to be in. Whether it works or not is something else. But there again, we were all doing those kind of things on an experimental basis ourselves.
And we were 20 years old, Bob. I mean,
exactly. Exactly.
It doesn't mean we don't love having these conversations every Friday. I mean, that's okay. It's okay. We don't, we're not against older people.
Well, I mean, that's the joy of it. I tell so many people about what we do, and they find that to be extremely enlightening. And gee, I wish our group, or I could get a group together to do something like that. I said, well, there was something just very magical about the group of people who were in Hartford, New Haven at that time when we were. It was a very exciting radio market. And the people that came in were filled with a lot of enthusiasm to go to the next level. We didn't want to just kind of stagnate and be, a disc jockey or program director in the media market. Some of us wanted to go on to something bigger, and that's what you do, at a young age when you can afford to make those moves. But it kind of gets off, what we were talking about.
Bob, what you're saying, when you think about the age back when you were on the air, and a lot of you guys were on the air at DRC, Corson and Buckley were the old men, but they hated the fact that my father was the old man at 58 years old. I mean, that was their world. And I remember one of the guys that went over to 104, then we first went alternative, Kerry Paul. And he was, Lee remembers Kerry, and Kerry was an older guy who was really came in to kind of like consult and stuff. And I said, Kerry, why don't they just let you program this? He says, I'm too old. And and the fact that corporate would say he's too old, it's not an age, it's a knowledge, it's a frame of mind. My dad, I don't know if he ever cleared 18. I do know at one point in time I got much older than him. Could you turn it down a little bit? But
Steve, the thing about Charlie was Charlie gave everybody on the screen here the opportunity. He was open to that generational change, and he was encouraging of young people. I think that's the difference is that somebody older has to be the one who opens the door and says, we want to have this new invigoration of ideas and energy. The thing that Bob's talking about, it's different when you're in a room that's filled with younger people.
Yeah, Ed, maybe Ed Bruder, what you could do is to the group, maybe send out the letter to Kennedy that that my dad wrote, and was it Joe Barbarette that did it?
Joe voiced it. He read it, but it was your father had written it.
Yeah, because that was like within hours of the assassination.
Yep.
And I would think that's a great example of, at the age that he was, then again, probably 38 or so, where he really was speaking that way. What I'm going to do, I'm going to get involved. I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to roll up my sleeves. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to make darn sure that things change. And that was an interesting point of view from his standpoint, talking to primarily a lot of teenagers that was listening to DRC.
And it's exactly what we need today.
Yep.
And I think that a guy who was a very active, he wasn't a politician, but he was an activist in Connecticut that a lot of people will recognize. Ned Cole, I think, got most of his exposure because of your dad. That DRC was open to providing him a mouthpiece.
Oh yeah, he was, about the marches, and I remember when
the Revitalization Corps.
Yeah, and I remember, and he was all committed, always stayed committed to JFK, and a lot of people, they would say, he always wanted to make noise. I mean, when he ran for office, he was on television doing a debate or something. He says, "You want to see the problem in Hartford? Holds up a rat by the tail." Wasn't afraid. He would go through the North End. He'd go marching through the North End. But when Martin Luther King was assassinated and the riots were starting in Hartford, that's when DRC came on with my dad and said, come on down, get a bag, go door to door. And they started like the King Youth Fund. And that was like, okay, take all that, hatred now. Because the last thing Martin Luther King wanted anybody to do was get violent, so instead of doing that, make a difference. But something, in today's world, boy, oh boy, corporate radio, I don't even think, you can't shoot from the hip like that and react.
Hey, can you imagine stations doing editorials these days? Nobody does editorials.
Pops Monahan Communications.
Yeah, here's an editorial.
Or Bob, everybody does editorials too. Yeah. That's the other end of that, because everybody has a megaphone and says whatever the heck they feel like saying.
Yeah, I'm talking like a GM or a PD at a radio station.
Yeah, that's long gone.
Yeah.
And my branch manager won't be.
Steve, can you imagine if Charlie were here on this screen right now, hearing what we're talking about? If he was invisible, he was just kind of listening in on us.
He is.
Maybe he is right now from heaven.
Yep. I always get a kick out of this because I've only been on the air a little bit, and that was the case with my dad. He'd love to get on the air doing spots, or if somebody, he could fill in for somebody, whatever it was. That's what he enjoyed, and he kind of gave you guys, pretty much full reign. And I always get a kick because I feel in many ways, I just listen to all you guys and let you do your own thing, and it's channeling him in a way. And I think a lot of you guys know, that relationship I always had with him and looking up to him. And still, it's one of the greatest compliments in the world when people like you guys bring him up, or people have accidentally called me Charlie, and I go, no, that's fine. But there's nobody out there with any balls anymore There's nobody that I always thought with POP, when we were, nowhere in the ratings, but we would still scoop TIC on news stories and stuff. I said, you know something? Why don't get a lot of young people out there that are just coming out of college, give them friggin' microphones with the flag on it, and let them go out and chase down the governor and make noise at a press conference. Chuck, you pretty much had a lot of reign, and so didn't you, Pat, to really go after stories, right?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I probably went too far for Joe Amaturo's taste. This was 67 or so, and I went down to D.C. For a big march on the Pentagon, and I was kind of semi-demonstrator, semi-reporter, and I slept on the floor of somebody's kitchen, and the next morning I wrote a long story about what I had seen at the Pentagon, and I phoned it back to POP. I don't think Amaturo appreciated that, but I left the copy behind, and a month or so later, I saw a copy of the Washington, D.C. underground paper, and they had put it on the front page with a byline. I think Joe Amaturo was a fair guy, but he wasn't up with the times. He'd managed to buy a top 40 radio station after owning a couple of MOR stations, and so he was a little confused. But if I had to compare him with Dick Corson, I mean, Joe Amaturo, first place, he owned the station. Second place, I think he was really committed to being fair to his employees. I mean, he paid me more than Dick Corson paid me. So the first time I truly felt that I could do whatever I wanted is once I owned a station. It was in a small town, but I was the general manager, news director, morning host, and I was really on the air for only a couple of hours each morning. But when I spoke, it was really the royal we. Of course, I talk about this. My thing was to validate the kids. Oh, you're going to be handing out books today? Wow, books are great. And after 14 years there, we retired. The community had a really nice dinner for Ginny and me. We still had the keys to the city on the wall of our living room.
Chuck, where was this that you owned a station?
That was Kane, Pennsylvania, up in northwestern part of the state.
Okay.
Near Bradford, where they make the Zippo lighters.
Hey, Pete, do you want to finish your thought about Charlie?
Well, number one, I never got to work for him, but it was because I wasn't ready when I did interview with him. But just can you, what I was saying was, can you imagine him getting the kind of feedback that he probably never completely realized when he was with us, when he was alive? And that's where the passion that he had, came back and could have come back to, for him to be able to do what Joe was talking about before. Hey, I appreciate this stuff that I did back in the day, listening back to an old air check or a video of CBS FM. This morning, I opened Facebook and I saw it's an air check, and Ed, you must know where it came from. 1960 to 64 composite air check of DRC, and it ended up on like the top of my feed. I don't know why.
It's the guy in New Britain, I think, who produced that, or didn't so much produce it as recorded it off the air.
But the station at the time was so far ahead of other stations, even far ahead of WABC, because it was real. It was, Charlie had this ability to apparently connect with reality on a point way deeper than what music to put on the turntable, and it was really all about what's between the songs that counted. And I think he was visionary as a result. And I never got to work for him, but I got to listen to his product before he retired. And man, that stuff was out of this world.
To his benefit, really was like a big kid, and he understood that whole genre of what was there at the time, as you mentioned, in the early 60s when they began doing top 40, and right on through the 70s during the period of time that I was there, which was 70, 74. He always remained contemporary, and he was really totally into not only what the music and the artists were about, but the audience. And he had this keen sense of how to really focus in on the emotions of listeners and how they would respond to things. That was really beneficial to his betterment of being a program director at a station with significant amount of impression on an audience. It was just it was almost like a once in a lifetime thing, to experience that.
When Charlie came up with a promotion, he got so excited about it, and he was so enthusiastic and passionate. It was infectious. I mean, everybody on the staff caught that, and we couldn't wait to get on the air to put his ideas, into action and make it a reality. I thought, working there all those years for Charlie as I did, coming in every day, it made it a great adventure because you never really knew what was going to come next. He was all in for it.
Yeah, Charlie was one thing that Charlie was big on, and not many stations did that. These were little different vignettes, mini features that we did. The 16 Years of Rock, we did that. He came in and handed me, so I'm going to do something for the 16 Years of Rock, maybe some air checks. And that's how I got Ed involved. He supplied me with all those materials for the 16 Years of Rock piece I did. I did the bicentennial piece, 7 minutes and 76 seconds of American history. And I just put that together myself. And he loved it, and he aired it. Every year we would do an end of the year countdown of all the different top stories. And I remember working with Steve Martin in the newsroom. We did these different sound bites and everything.
But Dave, excuse me, let people know it wasn't that Steve Martin. It was a different Steve.
No, different. He was our news director. Yeah. And anyways, we did that. And then one year your father did predictions, and he had a very I predict and had a little echo on it. And he predicted Ronald Reagan will become president of the United States. And there were a couple of things he did predict that actually happened. Ronald Reagan became president of the United States. There were a couple of others I don't remember, but he allowed you to do that. And when I left DRC in 1980, all that stuff kind of went away. It just, that happened even before I got there. John Rhodey doing Christmas Through the Years. That was a special feature. John Larrabee's The Gift. Dad and I produced that. That was on the air. And The Letter from Joe Barbarette. Those are the type of things that your father would do. And when I left, it went away. I'm sad.
That letter, the JFK letter, I've just put that up as the homepage at WDRCOBG.com. Charlie's letter is there in text, and you can listen to Barbarette's narration at the top of the page.
Yeah, beautiful. Hey, Dave, I can't imagine what it would have been like. Maybe you can tell us, to hear the stuff you produced and created even on the radio when you're driving around. What was that like?
That's a good question. That's an excellent question, because when I did it and would do things and I play it back and I said, who really is listening to this? Does anybody really care about this? And I get into work. I get somebody we did a Christmas piece where it was a half-hour hot seat show devoted where we had Santa Claus and his elves were going on strike, and we had the Grinch played by Bill Stevens, and Tom Ray and I worked on it, but all the L's were high-pitched voices. But what we did is we overlapped the voices. We had it in such a way where they actually overlapped. And I had people were asking me, how did you do that? How did you get, because I played a couple of parts in that and one of the elves and the technique. And it was funny because I was listening to the 35th anniversary of DRC, and somebody called in and said, he says, what happened to the stuff that Charlie did on the bicentennial thing? And he mentioned a few other things they did, and the Elvis eulogy. That was another one I put together. And I went to him. I said, "What do you think?" And he gave you that freedom. He gave you that freedom to be creative. And when you hear it on the air, and I did that. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, I did that. That sounded good. And stuff I listened to years later, I listened to them, I go, God, I did that. And that was all on tape. That was all reel to reel tape. And doing overlapping, having the equipment to do it with, it was amazing.
How old were you at that time?
I was 20, 25, 24.
Uh-huh.
That was
But
in
boy,
there,
and
27.
on top of that, he loved music. I could only, if you ever knew what was, Ron goes crazy. I held onto the desk because I got a lot of things at the storage, but storage wars. But I will tell you that, only Charlie Parker could have in the glove box of his car at that point in time, a fire engine red Firebird with T-roofs. When he got that car, brand new car, and he goes, Steven, how much longer am I going to be driving anyways? And in the glove box, he had Benny Goodman and he had Motley Crue. And that really, he loved Ray Conniff. He took me to see Sinatra with Count Basie and Ella Fitzgerald. I mean, he took me to see Wayne Newton, and I'm going, what the hell you want to see him for? Amazing performance. But his passion for that, was like his passion for everything else on the station.
Oh, yeah.
He never worried about if somebody else wanted to copy anything he did. Or he never wanted to do, well, we did it first. He didn't give a shit. He said, let him do it. Let's move on. That was the whole thing. He never got intimidated by any of that. But the rock and roll wars got pretty hairy. I'll tell you that, man.
Oh, being the first to play a Beatles song or something because he had somebody waiting at Bradley for the delivery of a 45.
Peter, we drove down to New York City.
Okay.
In many cases, we had to meet somebody. Ticket to Ride and Paperback Rider, I think we went down there to get. And I'll never forget, we went to dinner on the way back, and my sister was looking when they cut the head off the trout they were about to serve me. So, but and then he'd love to call back and say, I'm coming back. I'm in Bridgeport. He would talk about it coming back. And that was, and everybody, Merv Amos would get calls, from POP at home. Why don't we have it? Because they get it before Merv. But it was, he was passionate about every single thing that went on the air. Could be a religious show. He was passionate about it, and he always knew what was the right fit.
Well, the one thing
I don't hear people talking about one of the most remarkable things about Charlie, and that is he never just said, do this. He would sit in his office and he would come out with a single-spaced memo that would fill an entire page where he went through the gestures. That's what I want. He went through how he reached his decision. But by the time you finished reading that page, you'd had a class in radio programming. And I had never worked for anybody who was as big at thinking it out, sharing it, explaining it, and getting people on board.
Yeah. And we know that Ed, of course, has the turkeys coming up. If you go on to obg.com, he has the turkey
birds,
the greatest things. And I sent it to Jim. It's like a 3 or 4 page single-spaced memo about exactly how to do that promotion 24 hours a day. And the opening line was, think Orson Welles. And all he said was, God forbid if anybody decided to spill the beans to anybody. Yeah, it was just playing with people. He was the biggest kid. That was the best part.
Well, one of the things that your dad would do would come into the production room and he says, I got to record something. You got time? Yeah, okay, sit down. And the biggest one he did one day, he cut a track that took us about 2 minutes to do. And that was listen to the grand piano. That was it. That's all he said. He gets up, walks out, says, okay, what's this? He says, put something together. He says, it's a contest promo. I said, what's the contest promo? He says, I don't know. I got to think about it. I'll go by what you put together. And,
Wow.
and he mentioned something about, put different piano riffs with it. And I did it. And he came back and he says, okay, I got the idea of the contest. And it was kind of like a name that tune contest, I believe. But we did the Star Wars contest for Thanksgiving time where we had the soundtracks from Star Wars and
Shooting
the
turkey.
lasers going off and the turkey getting hit. And I start laughing because all I can picture is this turkey flying in space, getting zapped up the wazoo in the butt, and just whoa, going crazy. But I mean, that's what he made it fun. I was allowed to use my creativity, and sometimes I went off the wall. He didn't use, but majority of the stuff I did. I mean, Dan Samasco, when he'd produce Father of Audio Production, that was a tremendous piece, and he aired it. And he said, well, what is this about? But it was great. But everybody played a part. Jim English played the part of God in the beginning, and then
he wished my daughter. He welcomed my daughter into when she was born. He went on. He played it on the air.
Yeah, I mean, we did that same
Wow.
same thing with Mike Holland when Mike Holland's daughter Carrie was born, and put together this whole thing. Took me about 3 hours to put it together, but got it together, and again, music playing the role.
Yeah, he would. I remember going in for a knee surgery, and people in the Britain General found out, my dad was, and they said, "Can you get him to dedicate a record to us and all this stuff?" And I'm laying there about to be wheeled into the operating room, and they got me to the phone. And next thing I know, I think it may have been Mike Taylor. He'll tell me because now he listens to these things. But they played. Yeah, I was having knee surgery. So what do? Burton Cummings, stand tall. I mean, but out of all this stuff, and thank you guys, Chris. I always enjoy when it turns to Charlie, and I know that even if I wasn't here, you guys always have such wonderful memories of him, and that's the best. But I will tell you, no matter what happened, he'd never miss a call on a private line when I'd be asking him things or telling him something I saw about two girls sucking popsicles on a talent show on TV. Remember what was the Gong Show? I mean, and I call him to something I saw or something I heard, or if I wanted, the change out of his pocket, whatever, he would just say, Stephen, just take it. Just take. Is your sister okay? Okay. I love you. Bye. And always put family first, but never turn that radio off. You couldn't pull anything at 3:00 in the morning. He'd know. And when you mention, how the fun changed, that's why I left. I stayed a few months after him, wondering, if he was going to come back, and he went back and forth with that. But once I knew he wasn't coming back, I left. And my mom was there before my dad. It was the toughest decision I ever had made in my life. But there was no Charlie Parker, and the fun and the air in the building was sucked out. And I said, you know something? I don't want to be here, Dad. I just don't want to be here. I want to stay in Hartford radio. He goes, Al Pellegrino, a great guy.
Steve, when was that? When was it that he left?
That was 1983. Yeah. And it's funny. He was 58. He had just turned 58 in March 2nd of 1983. In April, he had his second heart episode because he had one a double in 1976, a double in 83 with complications, and they went back in a third time because he was hemorrhaging. But he was in the intensive care unit and wasn't able to talk for about 5 weeks, and he had a tube in his throat. And I said to the nurse in the ICU, I said, "Can you have music in here?" And she goes, "Oh yeah, sure." So I brought his Sony Walkman and put it on the pillow next to him, and just totally loud, Neil Diamond, America. And his eyes popped up. You could see him smile. And the toes were tapping. I said, just needed a little bit of rock and roll.
Right.
But he really, at his funeral, he planned
Reverend
his
Blue Jeans.
Yeah, he planned his funeral for so long. I said, Dad, I hope I die before you, because he really wanted it a production. Number one, Elton John, Funeral for a Friend, blaring, not just on, blaring through the funeral home. And you could hear it out in the street. And it was Funeral for a Friend with Love Lies Bleeding on it and these wailing guitars. But he produced that. It's like, he never stopped. And I will tell you though, probably the toughest thing and the cruelest thing was, last 10 years of his life, because of the pipe down his throat, because of the breathing machine. He had one paralyzed vocal cord. He went to doctors everywhere, specialists trying to see if they could correct it, including trying to shoot Teflon into his throat to kind of mend that. So the last 10 years of his life, he didn't have the voice that he wanted to have after he retired. But the fact that they never even went to him and said, Charlie, come in once a month, consult with us, talk to us. Never cared about the money, but always DRC was part of the family. And that was what I thought, would have been the simplest thing. He had more passion for that than anybody else, and he found a way to bridge the gap between sales and programming. He knew it was all about money. And that was not all about money, but money drove everything he wanted to do. So he could meet with a salesperson and come up with it. Howard's Piccadilly Relish, Ron knew. I mean, whatever the challenge was, he had something for you, right, Ron?
The great thing, I've said this 100 times before, the great thing about Charlie was he knew his obligation. He understood, look, I do what I do because I'm good at it and it works and the success, but I also know that there's a sales component to this thing. And if I could help the sales department be successful, then the radio station will be successful. And that's what he would do. And I'd go to him with these, I admit it now, horrible promotional things we had to do. And I used the Ingersoll Rand Employee of the Month or Worker of the Month. And he cringed, but he said, let me come up with something for you. And he did. I remember that was a $5,000 buy that I took away from TICAM. That made me feel so good because we came up with it. TIC was like, well, we're TIC. We don't do promotions. You buy us because we're the best radio station. And I remember the guy came to the radio station and he said, what can you do? I said, well, let me see what we can come up with. And your father came up with this idea for this worker kind of thing. And he made it work. And the guy loved it. He said, you know what? That's fantastic. And you'll give me this promotion around that? I said, yes, we will. You got to spend $5,000 to get it, but absolutely. He says, here's the $5,000. And because he knew there was an obligation.
But then he did when he wasn't out there anymore, and I was doing overnights at Kiss FM. He'd call me in the middle of the night and give me an idea. One night he calls me up. He says, "Okay, now play a record. Before you play the record, send it out to everybody working at Stop and Shop in Rocky Hill." He says, "And then wait like 3 beats and go, oh, there is no Stop and Shop in Rocky Hill." I knew if nobody else was listening, there was one man in a hospital bed at Hartford Hospital that was laughing his tail off. So, and I'll close with this because Dave's giving me emotion. I think that's emotion, and I've said this to everybody. But really, when I went on there at Kiss FM, I was so excited. I said, "Dad, what do I use as a radio name?" He just gave it to you when you were born. I said, he named me like he named so many other guys. I said, "Okay, I'll stay with that."
Okay, really quickly, Steve. A few of us had the luck and the skill to have worked in the number one market. I'm looking at Joe. I worked there for a few years. Yet. And we look back and we are very proud of what we did, and people still talk about the radio stations that we programmed, but nobody talks about what we did in the kinds of terms that we're talking about. Charlie Parker, a guy I never worked for, a guy I think Joe never worked for, but he's legendary, and it's all true. And there's still stuff today that programmers could learn from Charlie, because it wasn't just about sticking it on, putting it on 45, queuing it up and playing it. That's not what it was about. It was about serving people and attracting them and keeping them and making them have an emotional reaction to it. So, rah, rah, sis, boom, bah.
And the man could dress. He had the most incredible clothing. He'd come back from Palm Springs with a Paisley sports jacket or full leather coat, whatever. He did have black leather pants, because I went out shopping one time and I was in the store and they had black leather pants that were, it was ridiculously low price. And he goes, and I said, why are those so inexpensive? He goes, come on, who do you know with a 36-inch waist that would wear black leather pants? I said, I'll take them. Yeah, he always stayed on the edge with fashion. He grew his hair, I think, before I did. He could double for Kenny Rogers. He was really had a lot. I want to thank everybody going around the room, and we got into it a little bit early, so I didn't have the time to really, take the time to really introduce everybody, except quickly. Bob Craig, Pete Salant, John Landry, Chuck Kraus, Glenn Edwards. Glenn's been so quiet. Hopefully Glenn enjoyed it. Thank you, Glenn. Dave Overson, Ed Bruder, Joe McCoy, Bob Marks, Pat Sheehan, Ron Pell, Jim Harrington, Tracy Carmen. I think I went around the room. I don't know hopefully me, and from Berlin, Connecticut. And thanks everybody. This is always just, it goes this way from time to time, and of course I think it's wonderful. But when I sent out my note, it's all about friends getting together. That's it, no matter what it is. And I want to thank Pete, because Pete had quite a few things written down, and today he did get the ball rolling, as he always does. So Pete critiques me a bit too and gives me some direction when I go, help, what are we going to do? Hours before the program. And Pete has stuff. So we thank you, Pete, for that. And also, please remember, Bill Rock is going through some tough times right now. He's going to try to join us again next week. He's been going through he wouldn't admit that, but he's been going through a lot of doctor's appointments and stuff like so many of us do. So I thought some prayers go out to Bill, because he's always, pretty much very regular here. So I sent him a note, and so did Dave. And he replied to us that he was doing okay, and he planned on being with us again on Friday. And I know Bob DiCarlo has been going through some challenges, and he'll check in every now and then. But that's what it is. It's great when we can talk about stuff of the day, and I mean, Pat all the way from Texas. I mean, I love that picture, though. I think we need to see the pictures with the orange glasses and the orange suspenders more often. If you wore that on the news, Pat, boy, would I really have something going. That would have been good for radio. But
hey, Steve, I just want to say happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
And to you.
Thank you, Joe. Same back to you.
Yep.
And again, you can go to obg.com and check out the turkeys promotion. That was great. I should send that memo out. And also the JFK piece. Great stuff to listen to. And put your comments up there too, because I know Ed really watches that closely, and it's nice to hear those things too. So happy Thanksgiving to everybody, and
God bless us, everyone.
He's giving me this. All right, and don't forget the Broadcasters Association. Let me make this right.
Foundation.
What?
Broadcasters Foundation of America.
No, I always go associations.
I know you do that. You do that.
BFA.
Yes, BFA, Broadcasters Foundation of America. And if there's anybody having a tough time financially, sometimes at the end of the month you go, doesn't mean you're going to need help all the time, but they certainly are there to listen to whatever the situation is. And I know of one instance, thanks to Tracy, that Tracy was able to connect somebody with them. So they're out there for all kinds of support. So and support them when you can. If you get a couple of bucks, send it their way. But I think we'll get out of here now, and hopefully some of you guys will hang around. And Angela ran out; she finally got worn down. I'm Steve Parker from Berlin, Connecticut, and we'll see you again the next time on Radio Friends Again.
Your friends, Radio Friends Again, Radio Friends Again. We've got a lot to share.